perfectly.
Yay, team!
It's hard to say that you were drawn to the character of Steve Rhodes. The question was how tight I want to be in playing the character of Steve Rhodes.
As for the role of Steve's quirky wife, Marcy, Levitt and Moy didn't have any actresses in mind. But after dozens of auditions, casting director Mark Hirschfeld had a gut feeling about actress Amanda Bierce.
I don't know if she'd ever really auditioned for a comedy before, but there was just this sort of this fresh-faced, idealistic bride that I loved about her, and underneath you could tell she was really wearing the pants of the family.
When she read for the part with David Garrison, she nailed it.
I didn't have a say in Amanda getting the part, but it was clear from the read that that was going to be the chemistry that worked, and I'm really glad it did.
The hunt to find a replacement for Roseanne Barr, however, was not as simple.
Peg Bundy was originally seen as a couch potato. Katie Sagal had a different spin.
Actress Katie Sagal was definitely not Roseanne Barr. And when she auditioned, her version of Peg made a huge impression.
She saw her not as a couch potato, but someone who still thought of herself as a hot chick. She wore the capri pants and she wore the 6-inch high mules.
I read the script and I thought, she should really care about herself. And she dresses herself up, and I sort of see her as an ex-cocktail waitress, and I just love that she takes such good care of herself.
She came in, read, that was it. She was Peggy Bundy, and it was fantastic. 300 actors later, we were nowhere close to finding Al Bundy. It was really one of those times where you believe you've seen everybody in town.
We saw comic actors, we saw comedians, we saw Western yesteryear. We saw B and C movie stars. 80% of the people that came in to read for Al read it like Ralph Cramden, exactly like Jackie Gleason would have read. Then there was, 5% read it the way Jack Nicholson in The Shining would have read it. Wrong, just wrong. We had heard it read every way but a way that was funny. And we started to doubt whether or not this was ever going to work at all.
Casting director Mark Hirschfeld then remembered seeing a dramatic actor by the name of Ed O'Neill in the role of Lenny in a stage adaptation for Of Mice and Men.
This was probably 2 years before Married with Children. So this came up and I could not get Ed O'Neill out of my mind. I had no sense whatsoever he could do comedy. He had never done comedy before. But in my mind, I felt there was some connection between Lenny from Of Mice and Men and Al Bundy. Lenny would say anything because he just was not a particularly bright guy. And Al Bundy is basically the same way. He's completely uncensored because he's not a particularly bright individual.
I guess the middle of the week, they called us and said, "You guys got time to read one guy?" I'm like, well, it depends. Who was the guy? Ed O'Neill. Well, excuse us if we don't stand and applaud right now, but you want to follow that up with something like, who the hell is Ed O'Neill?
The only television series I believe he had done a busted pilot called Popeye Doyle, which was based on the French Connection.
Uh-huh. So he's a dramatic actor. Yes. You guys got any, Yosemite Sam coming in? You guys got any animated people? How about animals? You bring them in? Sure, we'll Ed O'Neill, fine.
Ed O'Neill came to the audition straight from a handball game, covered in sweat.
He walked in there, he sat down, and he's a very big guy, and he's a very powerful guy. But when he started to actually do the scene, he kind of went into this defeat mode.
Before he said a word, he just did this. Then he opened the door. He didn't have to say a word. From me, as far as I was concerned, he didn't have to say another word. That was Al Bundy. because only Al Bundy would know that no matter what day it was, when he opened that door, there was going to be crap on the other side of this door.
Sometime later, he said the secret to playing Al Bundy was, he said he always thought Al's life smelled bad. And if you look, when Ed comes on stage, he almost always he's smelling something bad, and what's that? It's his life.
The Bundy character, just the way he thinks, amuses me. He's so crude and so slow-witted, animal-like, you know, very basic.
A collective sigh of relief went out among the producers. And with the casting of Christina Applegate and David Faustino as the Bundy kids, they were finally ready to shoot their pilot.
Kelly Bundy was sort of the typical blonde babe that you would see on MTV. In every music video, you have one girl who's sort of the trashy girl, the one that you want to score with.
With David Faustino, he had a little bit of like the Michael J. Fox from Family Ties in him, except with evil.
With the cast in place, they shot the pilot episode, which had the long-married Bundys meeting their newlywed neighbors, Steve and Marcy, for the first time.
And Al takes Steve and Peggy takes Marcy, and they each explain to them that their life is ruined, marriage kills you, you know, get out while you can.
Your son is going to be a sissy, Mary, if you let that woman take away your sports.
Which leads to Steve and Marcy having their first fight, which so turns on Peggy and Al that they go upstairs to have sex.
It was so different from the Cosby-like storylines that dominated primetime that when presented to TV executives, it would lead to a battle of creative wills that would jeopardize the entire project. Just before Christmas 1986, the pilot for Married with Children was complete. For the creative team of Michael Moy and Ron Levitt, it was the project of a lifetime. A show that takes an unconventional view of family life for a network that promised them complete creative control.
Ron and Michael absolutely took them on their word for that.
What Ron and Michael didn't know is Fox's promise of creative freedom was about to be tested.
I found out about this evil entity called research and development.
You distribute it to the studio and the network, and then they do testing. They do audience testing, you know, with random groups or demographic groups that they bring in, and they ask people whether they'd watch the show, what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it.
I have a little bit of an aversion to research and development, based upon the fact that they're always wrong.
What happened was that between the time the pilot was shot and Fox had committed to putting the show on the air, the Fox research people came in to a meeting with Ron Levitt and Michael Moy.
We went to Fox and we sat in this boardroom with one of those ridiculously long mahogany tables, you know, where you sort of feel like they're going to come in with a pig and an apple in his mouth and just set it in front. We're all going to draw swords and alliance to the queen. It was one of those, you know, and the head of research had his graphs and pie charts and all that in front of him.
Married with Children was off the charts, top of the testing. They had never in history had a show test this high in the comedy reaction, but because their statistical way of doing things meant they threw out the top of the testing, it brought us down to sort of mediocre.
And the researchers said, well, you know, you have a very funny show here and so on and so forth, but our research has shown that, you know, if at the end of every show or someplace in the show, if the Al Bundy character would embrace his kids, would touch his kids, would hug his kids, then you could get away with a lot more of the outrageousness that you set up in this show.
And there was a long pause. And we looked around almost as if to say, so we're done now? Ron stood up first and said, and you, sir, are why television sucks.
For Levitt and Moy, it was a make-or-break moment.
They called Garth and they said, we're playing the freedom card. We are here working for less because we want the freedom to do our vision. And Al Bundy does not hug his kids unless they're bleeding.
The study said one thing, But Ansier's gut told him to trust Levitt and Moy.
Executives have to have enough courage in our business to say, I believe in this show, I'm putting it on television, despite what other people may say.
The findings from research and development were disregarded, and Ansier convinced the higher-ups at Fox to air the show as is. There would be no hugs on Married with Children.
He took a lot of heat for that, but he had great faith in his convictions that Ron and Mike were going to deliver something special.
Levitt and Moy had won their first major battle with the network. Fox was now ready to go on record and officially announce their debut lineup of original programming. Married with Children, The Tracy Ullman Show, 21 Jump Street, Mr. President, and Duet. There was a formal press event, and Michael Moy was selected to speak on behalf of Married with Children.
Michael Moy gets up, whereas everybody was in coats and ties. Michael may have changed his T-shirt that day, but he looked out in the audience and he said, how many of you are married out there? And 200 hands go up. He goes, still having sex with your spouses? Still enjoying that, are you? It's like a stunned silence. He said, how about your kids? How'd they turn out? Just like you wanted? Yeah, didn't think so. That's what our show's about. And at the end of the presentation, all anybody wanted to talk about was this new show, Married with Children, and who are these guys?
Married with Children premiered on Sunday, April 5th, 1987.
When Married with Children came on the air, they showed it 3 times in a row. There was nothing else on the network.
We made jokes on the show about, you had to have coat hangers and everything else in order to get Fox on your television.
Hardly anyone watched.
There's virtually no comedy show in America that starts strong. They have to build an audience because comedy is unlike any other form in that you have to understand the characters. So until you understand what the relationship of Al and Peg is, you're not going to laugh at the jokes.
One thing the show did succeed at, though, was getting the attention of critics.
I was astonished. It was coarse, it was vulgar, it was the talk of water coolers. People would say, did you see this, what happened on Married with Children? Can you believe they said this? Can you believe they said that? So it created a lot of buzz at the time.
Actor Ed O'Neill was the first member of the cast to get a glimpse of things to come.
There is a scene in the pilot of Married with Children where Al thrusting his hand down his pants. Doing that was a big part of his character.
Moments after the very first episode had aired on broadcast TV, O'Neill stepped out to get a bite at the local pizzeria.
And while he was standing waiting for his pizza, a teenage kid came in. Looked at him, did a double take, thrust his hand down his pants and went, hey! And Ed O'Neill said, I realized my life was never going to be the same.
Once you've gotten to where people recognize you almost everywhere you go, then you start to realize that anonymity is a big thing to give up.
Levitt and Moy's show attracted a small but loyal audience of younger viewers with a tolerance for edgy humor. It was definitely outside the mainstream. But that would soon change when a conservative housewife from Michigan would stumble upon an episode of Married with Children and decide she didn't like what she saw. In 1989, Fox TV's Married with Children was about to start its 3rd season. At the time, Fox was still a relatively obscure startup network. All of America's top 20 shows were on ABC, NBC, or CBS. But Married with Children's outrageous brand of humor was catching on.
Every week it kind of built and built and built and built with very little advertising. So clearly people were standing around water coolers going, have you seen this thing? Oh, you got to turn this on. This is the wildest. You got to see this. This Married with Children thing. You don't believe what they're doing over there. And that's how this show's popularity started growing.
According to Nielsen ratings, about 3% of American TV viewers were tuning into Married with Children, making it Fox's #1 show. What the Fox executives didn't know was that the show was about to experience an unwelcome explosion of publicity. On Sunday night, January 15th, 1989, conservative Michigan housewife Terry Rakolta tuned in to Married with Children for the first time.